here! I love it.
In the early 1900s, a group of Brazilian fishermen pulled off arguably the greatest nature scam in history. And the poor soul they pulled it on was none other than the former US President, Theodore Roosevelt, who at the time was fresh off of a failed presidential run and looking for some adventure in the Amazon. And the locals, well, they wanted to put on a show for our famous American, so they got to work weeks in advance, netting off a section of the river and stuffing it with piranhas, all the while making sure not to feed them a single thing.
Dude, every time I look at piranhas, I think, wow, they're one of the prettiest fish out there. Maybe not based on their faces. Their faces are a bit derpy. But the scales are so shiny. They're so pretty.
So that by the time Teddy rolled around, every single fish in the pen was starving and ready to chomp on anything that dared move in their general direction. And so of course, when Roosevelt showed up, like clockwork, the fisherman dragged out a live cow and shoved it into the water, which turned red, frothy, and bloody in seconds. While Teddy stood there watching what he was 100% sure was the most terrifying fish on the planet, where he then proceeded to recount the fish in his best-selling book, Through the Brazilian Wilderness, and calling it, I quote, the most ferocious fish in the world, with their malignant eyes and cruelly armed jaws. And yet, despite me telling you this story is in fact false, even though it's been spread around the internet for years, including by some more reputable sources. So yeah, there were no locals conniving to show false brutality of the Amazon, no piranhas, no cow. It simply didn't happen.
Oh, I thought the point he was gonna make was gonna be like, yeah, but look, these fish only did it because they were really starving. Not like, oh, this never even happened.
The book part was real, but not this embellished quote-unquote adventure, if you will. And that, my friends, is incredibly fitting considering that basically sums up what we think we know about piranhas as a whole. So in other words, basically everything you know is wrong, or at least wrong-ish. And so, despite Hollywood building entire horror franchises around these guys, and convincing kids around the world that falling into the wrong river meant being reduced to a skeleton in under
every single cartoon was showing piranhas. That's why I'm watching this video. I saw the title, I was like, piranhas. Man, I remember piranhas. For some reason, they had a big role in my life as a child watching cartoons, which I never would have expected, but here we are. And I'm sure this applies to countless other kids and now adults as well. I don't know if current children's media still features piranhas.
for 60 seconds, or dare I even say 10 seconds, this is all really just not true. And so, to understand what piranhas actually are, you have to start with the family they belong to, the Serrasalmons. And the easiest way to picture this family is as a spectrum, with a true piranha sitting at one end, and then the pacus at the other, and roughly 100 species in between. The family name itself comes from Latin for saw salmon, which is a nod to the distinctive saw-like keel running along the belly of every fish in the group. And they all share a laterally compressed body that kind of looks like someone took a normal fish and squeezed it from both sides until it was a little too flat for its size. But here's the first very interesting part, which is that this whole family descends from a common herbivorous ancestor, specializing not in meat flesh, but plant flesh, and only later splintering out to different branches that included more, well, interesting diets. So, what you've got today is around 60 species of piranhas, along with dozens of other species split between pacus and silver dollars, all sharing somewhat of the same body plan, but doing very different things with it. And when I say different, I really mean different. Take the black pacu, for example, which can reach close to 1 meter or 3 feet in length, and push past 40 kilograms or 88 pounds.
Girl, that's way bigger than I thought! What the fuck? That's a unit!
Making it the largest of all the saw salmons, including obviously all types of piranhas. But when you take a look at it head on, you'll quickly realize that something very different is going on. Because instead of a mouth full of serrated triangle blades, it's packing broad, flat molar-like teeth that also look kind of uncannily human-like.
What the fuck? You guys can see it at the bottom, at the edge of my model. What the hell? What are those? Why are they so human-looking? I don't like it.
And it would honestly, if I saw it in the wild, probably make me nope out just as fast as piranhas would. But the reason it has says teeth is actually pretty straightforward. Because when the Amazon floods every year, inundating tens of millions of hectares of forest, the pacu follows the rising water right into the floodplains, where it cruises through now downed forest, eating fallen fruit, and cracking open nuts. And also generally doing something that's quite underappreciated, and honestly a bit surprising too, which is acting as one of the Amazon's most important seed dispersers. And yeah, you heard that right. This is a fish that
It looks so derpy here! I love it.
lives in, well, the water, and yet is key to growing trees, which, well, live on land.
Oh,
And
I thought seed to like procreate fish, not seed to grow trees. That's crazy. What?
The 2011 study tracked them and found that these fish hold onto seeds in their guts for up to 12 days before depositing them, with some
Wow.
individuals carrying seeds as far as 5.5 kilometers or 3.4 miles from the mother tree. The team also went through the stomach contents of 230 different fish, pulling out nearly 700,000 seeds from 22 different species of trees and lianas, which is very impressive. And to put this into perspective, only the Asian elephants and African hornbills are known to disperse seeds as far in their guts. So here we have a fish beating most of the animal kingdom, despite being quite tiny in comparison, and non-terrestrial. And to top it all off, a well-fed, 10 kilogram or 22 pound individual can have over 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of seeds in his
Dang.
guts. So
They're farmers. Wow.
yeah, my guy's literally a mobile seed pouch. Now, when we get to the so-called real piranhas, things get more complicated, but in a totally different direction. You see, most recognized piranha species fall into a handful of genera, primarily Pygocentris, Ceresalmus, Pristobryson, Pygopristis, and then people sometimes also include in the likes of Catoprion. And within this group, the dietary diversity is bananas, pun intended. The red-bellied piranha, Pygocentris enteri, is the dreaded species most responsible for Hollywood's whole reputation of these fish. And its Pygocentris relatives all share that convex, bulldog-shaped head/face, and a proportionally massive lower jaw packed with razor-sharp triangular teeth, with each tooth fitting into a socket on the adjacent tooth, and thus forming what is essentially a continuous serrated blade that runs the entire length of the jaw. And so, the whole setup looks like it's been designed for the worst possible purpose. And honestly, it kind of is, depending on your perspective, seeing that it is a jaw optimized for cutting, and rapidly at that. But the real question comes down to what it's actually cutting. And the answer is a lot more peculiar than you might think, because the red-bellied piranha is not the red meat lover you might think it is. Instead, it mainly feeds on insects, worms, crustaceans, fish, and then also fallen fruit and seeds.
I mean, to be fair, we kind of can't hate on piranhas for eating other animals because lots of animals eat other animals to some extent. I think the fear factor they got was because of the depictions of them eating humans, or I guess eating some big livestock in a very, very short amount of time as a big gang. So it was kind of like the notion of the fish ganging up on you when you step into the water or something like that. That's probably why they were used in cartoons so much. Because just by itself, yeah, it's a fish. It eats stuff to stay alive. Like, that's not surprising.
So, shocker, but unlike what Hollywood might have you believe, omnivory is the rule with these guys, not carnivory. And then other piranhas still go for that umami goodness, but are pacifists at heart, kind of. And what I mean by this is, take the wimple piranha, Catoprion mento, for example, which has evolved one of the weirder feeding strategies in freshwater biology, and that's eating, wait for it, scales. Now you're probably like, what? How does it go about doing that? Well, it's odd because, like I said, they don't really have a vested interest in murder, but rather just the shiny stuff, i.e. scales, which are removed by executing a high-speed ramming strike to literally knock the scales out. A 2005 study used high-speed footage to capture the strike, and it's something else, with the fish achieving a gape angle of nearly 120 degrees, which is unusual enough on its own, even when putting aside the whole eats shiny things bit. And so, the end result is that the host fish survives, albeit probably traumatized, the scales regenerate, and the wimple piranha gets a meal that essentially renews itself. And interestingly, the fish can actually switch tactics depending on what it's going after, because when chasing elusive prey, or grabbing loose scales floating in the water, it uses a more typical suction strike, much like a normal predator. But when going after a specific target fish for scale removal, it deploys the full force gape attack. So, in other words, this is a flexible weirdo, not just a one-trick weirdo. And the wimple isn't even the only freaky guy in the family, because several other Ceresalmus species are what ichthyologists call pterygophagists, meaning they specialize in nipping fins rather than scales. There's even one species, Ceresalmus marginatus, that has been observed sometimes acting as a cleaner fish for its larger red-bellied piranha relatives, picking parasites off of them. So, here we have a piranha grooming another piranha with no bloodthirsty defleshing involved. Who would have thunk? And running through all of this dietary diversity is one shared trait that's quite peculiar to say the least, and that's their dental system. See, generally speaking, most vertebrates replace their teeth one at a time throughout their lives, or at certain points in their lives. But piranhas and pacus do something different. in that they shed and regrow the entire row of teeth on one side of the jaw simultaneously. So basically, the whole right or left side just suddenly loosens, falls out as a unit, and then the row of replacement teeth that has been developing beneath the surface snap right into place, after which the opposite side does the same thing. And interestingly, this is not an adaptation from meat eating as one might assume, instead with one study finding that every single ceresalmid shares this trait, with just one exception. And so, rather the real reason why this matters is due to the fact that they all share interlocking teeth, which simply would not work, or work as well, if a tooth was missing because then it would break up the continuous edge, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
And unsurprisingly, the tools used to use their tools, in other words how they find food, are just as specialized as their teeth, though unsurprisingly they get way less attention. Now, like I said, the body is laterally compressed and they have these relatively large eyes, with some studies having referred to them in certain species as being exceptionally well developed, likely being an adaptation for the low light environment of the flooded forest. They also have what seems to be pretty big nostrils, considering the fact that, well, you can see them. I mean, how often can you think of seeing a fish's nostrils?
Not often.
Might be outing me as someone who doesn't really know his way around a fishing pole, but regardless, sniffing is definitely a skill of theirs, and
Hey yo, sniffer? No, to be honest, I never paid enough attention to how a fish looks to notice if they had nostrils.
one early study on them noted that they had highly differentiated olfactory systems, showing a strong degree of specialization. They say those that their nose is clearly a strength of theirs. And considering that they have to navigate in what is often murky waters, the ability to detect any potential food through a non-visual system is quite the game changer.
Hi guys, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you!
And once a tasty morsel is found, absolutely no mercy is shown. With the black piranha, Ceresalmus rhombeus, holding the record for the most powerful bite of any bony fish ever recorded, measured at 320 newtons at the front of the jaw. And for reference, that force nearly 3 times what an American alligator of comparable size can produce.
Bruh.
And so when you correct for its body mass, it's putting out force more than 30 times the fish's own weight. A feat that is not only unmatched among bony fish, but also amongst vertebrates, period.
Okay, would it hurt if this piranha bit my finger? Dumb question. He just described how strong the bite is. I now believe it would hurt.
And the comparisons just keep going. Because when you scale for body size, the black piranha actually outclasses great white sharks, hammerhead sharks, barracudas, and get this, also the megalodon.
What the
yes,
fuck?
The freaking megalodon.
What?
As well as a nearly 4,000 pound or 2,000 kilogram armored Devonian nightmare, which you might have heard of, known as the Dunkleosteus.
No, but I need to hear more about it. Does Extinct Zoo has something about this?
And the researchers measured all of this by catching wild piranhas and getting them to clamp down on a force measuring device. An experiment that sounds easy enough on paper, but I imagine in practice was a tad bit terrifying.
Okay, it does hurt. The guy looked very pained when that thing bit him.
Unsurprisingly, the muscle complex for the bite takes up quite a bit of weight, at 2% of the fish's total body mass, which might not sound like a lot, but to put that into perspective, there has never been a bony fish recorded at such a high proportion. But here's the ironic bit. This power is not typically used to attack large animals, but is instead often more deployed on plants, fallen fruits, and animals much smaller than themselves, like insects and small fish, and sometimes scales or the tasty fin or two when they get the chance.
Nom nom nom.
So basically, the jaw is way overbuilt for the job it usually does, which kind of makes you wonder what evolution would do if it took the same setup and then just pushed it even further. And oh wait, we actually have a great example of that.
Ayo.
Enter Megapiranha piranensis, a fish which lived in what is now Argentina roughly 9 to 6.8 million years ago, and was something else entirely, literally and metaphorically. This absolute specimen of a specimen measured about 71 centimeters, nearly 2.5 feet long, weighing somewhere around 10 kilograms or 22 pounds.
That's pretty big.
Which already makes it several times the weight of a modern piranha. And this, by the way, is just the lower estimate, with some studies giving it a weight of potentially 73 kilograms or 161 pounds.
What? That's a human. That's a human.
But what's kind of strange is that the holotype, which, by the way, is just a premaxilla, shows the teeth arranged in a zigzag pattern, with a tooth morphology that looks like an intermediate between true piranhas and their pacu cousins, which suggests that perhaps this animal set either at a transition point in the family's evolutionary history, or, and more likely, had a more intermediate diet. But one thing that certainly wasn't no intermediate level was their bite force. Because remember how I said that the black piranha had the highest adjusted bite force of any known bony fish? Well, scratch that, because one has it beat. And that's, of course, the mega piranha, who could have possibly topped out at a bite force at 9,498 newtons, which means that at these numbers, a 73 kilogram mega piranha would have bitten with the same amount of force of a 3,000 kilogram great white shark.
Bruh.
3,000 freaking kilos. The same study also tested whether the mega piranha's teeth shape, combined with the force, could fracture the bones and hard tissue of large animals. And the answer was a resounding and obvious yes, with the teeth being able to pierce through a cow femur and go through turtle shells like butter.
Oh.
So basically, here you have a giant piranha, or should I say mega piranha, that could open turtles like a can opener, crunch through genuine megafauna femurs, which is, for the record, one of the strongest bones in the body. So, good thing it's been dead for several million years.
Yeah.
Right? Now, speaking of megafauna, despite their reputation, modern piranhas don't actually attack large vertebrates regularly, with much of its negative reputation coming from records like Roosevelt's, as well as its habit of consuming dead bodies, which can make it look like the piranhas were the original killer and not just a scavenger. And interestingly, and contrary to what you might think, studies that have actually looked at necrophagous consumption in the ecosystem, i.e. the eating of dead things, have found that it's actually various species of catfish that are responsible for most of the consumption of drowned people.
I do remember watching the Casual Geographic video about catfish, and they do seem menacing, at least some of them.
Not piranhas. And if you've ever seen River Monsters, you might have seen the one episode where Jeremy Wade took red-bellied piranhas, put them in a pool, a small pool that is, proceeded to put blood and meat in said small pool, and then literally the mad lad jumped in the water with them. And guess what happened? The end of River Monsters.
Rip.
Just kidding. Absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. Well, actually, something did happen, which was that they moved to the edge of the swimming pool away from the scary man thing. And the fact that they did this also speaks towards another myth of these guys, which is that people believe that groups or shoals of piranhas' main purpose is cooperative hunting. And yet, there is actually no evidence of this at all, with a shoaling or grouping of these animals actually instead being an anti-predator behavior, not a predator behavior, with a shoaling really just being a strength in number kind of thing. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about it, especially since, well, they're not that big, and also because their predators are no joke either, as they include caimans, giant river otters, birds, other fish, and river dolphins.
Dang.
And so to survive in a river full of things that will eat you, piranhas shoal. And the composition of that shoal is not random either. One study exposed red-bellied piranhas to a fake cormorant, which is a type of bird, in order to simulate a predator attack. And what they found is that fish in groups of 8 return to their resting breathing rate much faster than fish in just groups of 2, with the smaller groups showing elevated ventilatory rates for much longer after the simulated threat, which, just like when you hyperventilate before having to give a public presentation, is a physiological measure of sustained stress. So basically, in a large group, the perceived risk per individual drops, and the fish can chill more quickly. The shoal, by the way, is also socially stratified, with the older, bigger individuals occupying the central positions where exposure is lowest, while the younger, smaller little guys get pushed to the edges, i.e. the worst location, where predation risk is higher. So basically how human society works too. Just kidding, kind of. But overall, looks like Hollywood is taking another L, as they got this pretty much exactly backwards, because that quote-unquote menacing death cloud shoal you see in movies is in reality just a giant huddle of nervous fish trying not to die. And another wrinkle in the big eat you alive scary fish picture is their reproduction, which adds another behavioral layer that directly explains many piranha attacks. Now, you have to understand, piranhas are generally seasonal breeders, with the males during the naughty season excavating bowl-shaped nests in soft sediment, with the female then depositing her eggs in adhesive clumps that cling to submerged vegetation in the nest.
Okay.
And during this time, the soon-to-be parents guard their starter home with all the aggressiveness you come to expect of piranhas, attacking pretty much anything that enters the nest zone. And yes, that include people, mainly their feet, that are trespassing on their home. So, fun, not so fun fact, many of the documented piranha bites on humans seems to be associated with defensive behavior during the breeding season, not deliberate hunting or the likes.
I mean, honestly, they're valid. I mean, if someone was to step on my child, I'd be a little bit pissed, not gonna lie.
With one 2025 review looking at 711 documented piranha bites over a 10-year period,
Bruh.
and finding that roughly
Only 700? Hollywood has slandered the reputation. They're just chill little guys. Justice for piranhas, man.
82% of them were classified as mild, with single bites instead of repeated ones, which is exactly the pattern you'd expect from a defensive bite, not a feeding strike. And guess what? About 30% of attacks happened during the breeding season, lining up perfectly with a nest defense hypothesis, while then another 26% was associated with improper food disposal in rivers, meaning that people were basically chumming up the water without realizing it. And so, a good chunk of these incidents, in other words, piranha attacks, trace back to humans either stepping into nests or just baiting the fish themselves, which is, on us. Now,
Yeah.
obviously I'm not going to sit here and tell you that these guys are harmless, because,
No.
well, they're not.
Not
As serious
entirely.
wounds from piranhas have been documented, and while exceedingly rare, human fatalities attributed directly to piranhas have also been noted. But at the same time, there are many cases that seem to be a bit muddy, in the sense that it's not clear if someone died due to drowning and then were partially eaten by piranhas, i.e. scavenging, or if it was the piranhas that actually took them out. But considering how extensive their range is, and how abundant they are within said range, the fact that human deaths are so exceedingly rare does say a lot. But even with that said, the piranha does rightly earn some hate. Perhaps not so much from us humans, but rather from other fish. Because like I said, piranhas do sometimes feed on the fins and scales of their cousins,
Yeah.
and while that doesn't kill them, obviously not everyone appreciates being forcibly stripped by an annoying big-toothed fish. And so in
Yeah.
response to this public indecency epidemic, some of them have developed some pretty interesting defenses to it.
So basically, piranhas are not really dangerous to humans as much as one thinks from the media. You should still be careful around them because they're still a wild animal, but they're big bullies of other fish.
Such as potentially the arapaima, one of the largest freshwater fish on Earth,
Holy!
who can reach a staggering 3 meters or 10 feet in length, and weigh more than 200 kilograms or 440 pounds.
Holy!
And what does Big Chungus do to prevent this? Well, it's built different, and not just from a size perspective, but also its scales. You see, each scale is made up of a hard, mineralized outer layer and a collagen-rich inner layer, whose long fibers are arranged in rotating sheets, in a configuration called a Boligan pattern, which basically looks like a spiral staircase of collagen, and allows the material to deform and absorb force rather than break under it. And researchers at UC San Diego and Berkeley tested arapaima scales against actual piranha teeth, and the results were quite shocking, as not only could the scales easily withstand simulated piranha bites, but they were also capable of withstanding pressures of up to 1.7 million pounds per square inch, which for perspective is close to twice the pressure that US nuclear submarine hulls can withstand.
Bruh.
So yeah, built different is perhaps even an understatement. There's even some hypotheses around the idea that arapaima scales evolved specifically as anti-piranha armor.
They evolved out of spite. They were like, stop fucking taking my scales, you bitch. I'm gonna evolve so you can't physically do it anymore. Get wrecked.
But then again, there's also been others who refute it, saying that piranhas are much too small to drive such evolutionary pressure along the arapaima. But it's certainly a cool idea.
Yeah.
The idea that one of the world's largest freshwater fish had to develop some of the most complex scales ever seen just to survive. So yeah, piranhas, pretty wild. Thanks for watching, and until next time.
That was a cool video. If anything, my opinion on piranhas hasn't changed much because I've seen a couple videos about them being not as bad as media says they are. I do still think they're one of the most beautiful looking fish with their really shiny and pretty scales. So I think I really like them. But I'm probably not going to stick my feet into a piranha infested water anytime soon. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.